Is LSU ready to stop Jalen Milroe? Brian Kelly weighs in, and we're talking about it. It's Locked on LSU. Let's go.
You are Locked on LSU, your daily podcast on the LSU Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Okay, let's get it. It is Locked on LSU, your team every day. I'm your host, Matt Moscona. Thanks for making us your first listen. We are free, available wherever you get podcasts, of course, on YouTube as well. So please subscribe. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. You can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet, and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. We have a ton to dive into as Brian Kelly met with reporters to preview the Alabama game. Will a tropical storm affect Saturday's game? We have some updates there. LSU will be down starting offensive lineman Garrett Dellinger. So how do they adjust? Also an update on linebacker West Weeks. But let's begin with what is very likely the single biggest question pertaining to LSU on Saturday, and it's Jalen Milroe. You've heard me talk about it already if you've been with us, but Jalen Milroe a year ago against LSU did not beat the Tigers with his arm. Now, he threw for 219 yards, but did not throw for a touchdown or an interception. It was Jalen Milroe's legs which beat the Tigers. On that night in Tuscaloosa, Jalen Milroe ran 20 times for 155 yards and count them, 4 touchdowns. So I think for LSU fans, probably observers who maybe aren't locked into every snap of Alabama football, you might think that's the norm for Jalen Milroe. Well, it's actually far from it. The performance Jalen Milroe had against Alabama or against LSU a year ago and against Georgia this year are actually the stark outliers. When Brian Kelly met with reporters on Monday of Alabama week, I had the opportunity to ask him about Jalen Milroe. And the way that I specifically asked the question was, how is what Kalen DeBoer is asking Jalen Milroe to do different from what Tommy Rees asked him to do a year ago? And I thought Brian Kelly's answer provided an awful lot of color.
Well, last year, Matt, it was evolving. Like, I don't know that they knew what they wanted to do because it was a quarterback controversy. But they were kind of playing multiple quarterbacks last year at Alabama. I think they had 2 or 3 quarterbacks going back and forth. Then they kind of settled on Milroe just before they got to us. And it was, I think, big chunk play. It was run the quarterback. Here, they've had all spring, and they've settled on a system with a starting quarterback. So it's consistency week in and week out. They're doing the same thing with him week in and week out. So there's a comfort level within the offense. When we got to him last year, you weren't really sure what you were going to get. It was a little bit of everything. And now there's a consistency within their offensive structure, and there's a comfort level in terms of what he's doing.
Boy, I think that's great news for LSU. By the way, he's right. So at the beginning of the season last year, Alabama was playing Jalen Milroe, Ty Simpson, and Tyler Buckner. They had 3 players, 3 quarterbacks, if you remember. And as a matter of fact, Jalen Milroe struggled early. They lost, you might remember Alabama did on their home field to Texas 34-24. And Milroe threw 2 touchdowns and 2 interceptions in that game. He ran it 15 times for 44 yards. But after that game, they benched Jalen Milroe. He didn't play, remember, in the game against South Florida the next week. Now, ultimately, they got to the point where they settled on Jalen Milroe, like Brian Kelly said. And by the time they played LSU, Bama's only loss was that loss to Texas. And they kind of steadied themselves a little bit. But part of Alabama steadying itself a year ago, and I promise I'm going to bring this to Saturday in just a second, just bear with me. Part of that was them trying to run Jalen Milroe, but not successfully. I want to run through Jalen Milroe's rushing stats by game a year ago. Now, bear with me here, okay? Like, there ain't going to be a test. You don't need to memorize this. But when I read through this, there's going to be an illustration that is so stark, you're going to understand what I mean, right? So we all watched Jalen Milroe ran for 155 against LSU last year and 4 touchdowns, okay? Here were Jalen Milroe's rushing stats per game. Against Middle Tennessee, 7 for 48. Texas, 15 for 44, an average of 2.9 per carry. Against Ole Miss, 16 for 28. Oh, they were trying. 16 for 28 yards. At Mississippi State, 11 for 69. Against Texas A&M, 8 for negative 31. Of course, sack yardage is in that, but only a long of 12 in that game. Against Arkansas, 11 for negative 19. His long was 7. They played Tennessee, 9 rushes for 3 yards. Y'all, Jalen Milroe wasn't good at running the football a year ago. And then LSU rolled into Tuscaloosa. And Jalen Milroe ran it 20 times for 155 yards and 4 touchdowns. Now, LSU last year was atrocious, we all know. But what happened against LSU was an outlier. Wasn't even close to the norm. A week later, 1 week after that performance against LSU, they played Kentucky. 8 rushes, 36 yards, a long of 16. Against Tennessee Chattanooga, 3 for negative 1. And then they had a really good game against Auburn. 18 rushes for 107. Average 6 yards a carry. And then they played Georgia in the SEC championship game. 14 rushes for 29 yards. And then in the college football playoff semifinal, 21, the most rushing attempts on the season, 21 for 63, an average of 3 yards a carry. That tells you they didn't trust him to throw the ball against Michigan. All that tells you is last year, Jalen Milroe wasn't some phenom running the football. Oh, he is the most skilled runner that LSU faced a year ago at quarterback and will face this year. But overwhelmingly, Jalen Milroe has been poor against the majority of the teams and teams that are lesser personnel-wise than LSU. Let's look at this year. You heard Brian Kelly say it. They have more of a last year, it was mixing and matching. Now they have a plan. They're doing the same things with him every week. Here you go. Here's his rushing totals. Against Western Kentucky, 10 for 79, almost 8 yards a carry. South Florida, 12 for 2 yards. Wisconsin, 14 for 75. Georgia, 16 for 117. That was the other big outlier. Vanderbilt, remember, the big game against Georgia. The big game. Subsequently, Vanderbilt, 7 for 10. South Carolina, 18 for 36, 2 yards a carry against South Carolina. Tennessee, 14 rushes, 11 yards. Missouri, 11 rushes, 50 yards. Y'all, if LSU can replicate what literally any of the defenses that have faced Alabama this year have done against Jalen Milroe, LSU will win the game going away. I shouldn't say going away, but LSU will win the game. Now, that 16 for 117 against Georgia was impressive, but it was all in the first half. I'll remind you that in the second half of that football game, Alabama ran for 16 yards as a team in the entire second half. It was all in when they built the big lead. The point is, what Brian Kelly just said there is Alabama has more of a plan for Jalen Milroe this year every single game. And if you're LSU, that's a good thing because when you've known what the plan is from other teams, you've been able to develop a scheme to defend against it, and you've done really well. Look at the first 2.5 quarters against Texas A&M. When you had schemed for Connor Wegman, you played so good defensively, you knocked him out of the game. They benched him. A week before, with a running quarterback, you're facing Taylor Green, Jaquindon Jackson. You held them to 38 rushing yards at a night game in their place. Blake Baker, it's on you to figure this out. I've seen Western Kentucky and Tennessee Chattanooga and South Carolina and South Florida and Vanderbilt all find ways to limit Jalen Milroe's ability to run the football, even when they try. Double-digit rushing attempts. Can you do the same? Can you do the same and make Jalen Milroe beat you as a passer? That's what Kalen DeBoer wants. Kalen DeBoer wants Jalen Milroe to be Michael Penix. Jalen Milroe ain't Michael Penix. And if LSU can make Jalen Milroe try to beat them throwing the football, Tigers will win Saturday night. A lot more complexities to the game that I want to delve into, including a big loss on the LSU offensive line. We'll get to that next. Locked on LSU, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by Roy. LSU fans, time to recognize the Roy Player of the Week. So far this season, we've pooled more than $20,000 to support players on Roy. Micro deposits lead to massive change. With the Roy app, you can direct your support to athletes you love, ensuring that all funds go specifically to the player you choose. Unlike a collective, you know exactly where your support is going, and you even receive exclusive content like personal videos and updates after the season. And the best part, it's all risk-free. If the athlete transfers or doesn't deliver the content, you get your money back. This week, of course, Tigers didn't play last week, so let's see how LSU may do, and we'll pick a new Roy athlete next week where we can pitch in $100, and you can join me. Even $10 makes a difference. So show the Tigers your love and keep them connected to our school. Remember, pay today, celebrate tomorrow. Your support sets your team up for success. Plus, don't miss out on Roy's exciting giveaway. You can win 2 tickets to a game in November. Download Roy, create an account, enter the referral code Locked On, and you're entered. If you're already on Roy, any contribution to an athlete's campaign also gets you entered automatically. No purchase necessary, void where prohibited. Download Roy now and join the NIL game with no subscriptions and no fees. And be sure to check us out on Instagram, Facebook, and X at Roy_return_on_you for more info. Roy, support players, change the game. So as Brian Kelly continued meeting with reporters, he did make one unfortunate announcement, and that is that LSU starting left guard Garrett Dellinger is out for the Alabama game. They do hope, however, to get Dellinger back next week at Florida. Dellinger did have that tightrope procedure on his ankle that he suffered the injury in the second quarter against Texas A&M. So Dellinger will not be available for this game, and I am not going to downplay that at all this week. Garrett Dellinger has played in 41 games. He has started 30 times. He is your highest rated offensive lineman by Pro Football Focus. He and Will Campbell have played side by side now for 3 years. I am not going to tell you going up again in this game against that team, especially when you have struggled to run the football, that losing a big physical interior offensive lineman who's played in 41 career games with 30 starts, I'm not going to hand wave that aside and say that's no big deal. I think that is a big deal. And the real question is, how much can Paul Mubenga narrow that gap? By the way, Paul Mubenga, of course, filled in for, now remember, just a quick recap. Tyree Adams was LSU's 6th offensive line. Tyree was supposed to be the guy, if anybody except the center went down, Tyree Adams was the next guy in. Before the Ole Miss game, Adams suffered that sports hernia. He had surgery. He's been out. So that means Bo Bordelon is now your backup at either tackle spot, and Paul Mubenga is your backup at guard. And we had to see Paul Mubenga play the second half against Texas A&M after the injury to Dellinger. And here was Brian Kelly on Monday talking a little bit more extensively about Paul Mubenga.
Paul has steadily worked himself up into what would have been what I would call a key backup, right? Somebody that, is poised to go in a pivotal time, and you expect him to get the job done. Now he's a starter for us, most likely for at least this week, right? And so his development has been one where I think he's made his most progress through execution. He's a quick study. You don't have to tell him twice. He understands our scheme in terms of what we're trying to accomplish. This has been really just about the physical development of Paul, more so than it has been about, his mental abilities relative to picking up what we want to do and how we want to do it.
So I don't know that that's the most glowing endorsement. Essentially saying Paul Mubenga knows where he needs to be, knows his assignments. He just got to get physically bigger and better. And that just comes along with experience. You have a young guy that wasn't supposed to be the backup in this spot, but here he is unapologetically, and you got to go make it happen. So Paul Mubenga now, and I'm looking through my notes from fall camp to see if Paul Mubenga was running at left, at second team left guard all throughout fall camp. Because they did have a lot of rotations, obviously with Tyree Adams playing in some of those spots as well. But in any event, this is an opportunity for Paul Mubenga now to get out there and have a big opportunity in a big spot. For what it's worth, Pro Football Focus has charted 92 snaps on the season for Paul Mubenga. Remember, Garrett Dellinger has played in 41 games with 30 starts. Mubenga's got 92 snaps. And his run block grade has not been very good. He was a 38.3 against Texas A&M. His highest run block grade of the year was against Nichols with a 64.4. But this is a much bigger challenge against Alabama. Now, the flip side of that, and I have mentioned this and I will continue to mention this, is that while we look at Alabama and we look at the uniform and we can certainly appreciate what Alabama has been, it is also fair to mention what they are. Not what they've been, what they are. And what Alabama is through 8 games this season is the lowest ranked run defense that LSU has played all season. Alabama is 68th in the country against the run. That is the worst run defense that LSU has faced this year. I'm not sitting here telling you LSU is going to go wild and run for 200 yards in this game. But what I am telling you is LSU has struggled at times to run the football, but they've also faced Ole Miss and Texas A&M and UCLA, which is a top 20 run defense in the country as well, and South Carolina and Arkansas, which at the time LSU played it was right around 30. They were top 40 run defense in the country. The point is, Alabama 68th against the run is the lowest. I don't care what the uniform looks like and what the name says. That is the lowest rated run defense you will have played all season. Go make some hay against them. One other injury update from Brian Kelly was
probably as balance of a football.
One of the updates Brian Kelly gave was on CJ Daniels, who we've talked about. CJ Daniels, he's Garrett Nussmeier's security blanket. The coaching staff loves him. He's their best blocking wide receiver. He's a sure-handed receiver. He's the highest graded among the drop grades, meaning he never drops the football. Maybe not the explosive big play ability, but when you need 8 yards, he'll get you 10. And he played against Texas A&M. I missed the Arkansas game. Played for the first half against Texas A&M. And then, no, forgive me, he missed Ole Miss, and then played the first half against Texas A&M, but was still hobbled a little bit and missed that second half. Here was the update from Brian Kelly on CJ Daniels.
So CJ is much better than he was, obviously, going into the A&M game. And I thought he did a terrific job getting himself ready. I thought our training staff did an incredible job, our doctors, in helping him get ready for a game that, you know, in many instances, it was a game-time decision. I know a lot of you were there, and you saw him working out before the game to get himself ready. Unfortunately, he couldn't answer the bell in the second half, but he's further along. You know, we don't have to put out a report, but I would say he's much better than he was a couple of weeks ago, and the expectation would be that he's going to be able to help us.
Alabama's 35th in the country against the pass, 35th most passing yards allowed at 193 a game, but this will be the best passing offense that Alabama will have faced this year. And if you have CJ Daniels back, that's just a huge help for Garrett Nussmeier, having that security blanket there. I'm not going to say it's exactly why, but I also don't think it's coincidental that a lot of the issues you had in the second half with Garrett Nussmeier came without CJ Daniels on the field. If he's able to go, that's a big boost for this LSU offense. Okay, it is Locked on LSU. What about the playoff implications? Brian Kelly discussed that, and a frigging tropical storm in November. Are you kidding me? We got to talk about it. It's next. Locked on LSU, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL, all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's at FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NFL. It is almost unfathomable that we're here in November. LSU is going to play Alabama Saturday night in Tiger Stadium, and we have eyes on a tropical storm in the Gulf. Brian Kelly was asked about it on Monday.
Goodness, I mean, there's so many things to consider going into, the Alabama game. The one thing I didn't have to think about, I thought, was, another storm coming. But as we get closer to game time, probably tomorrow, we'll probably have to look a little bit closer at the weather situation, but is definitely on the list now.
Well, we'll keep an eye on it. For what it's worth, as I sit here recording this episode on Monday night, I am looking at the weather app. I'm looking at Saturday, and it actually looks okay, with a 15% chance of precipitation in the early morning hours Saturday, and just very low percent chances of rain throughout the day. So maybe we'll get lucky. I was asking some old heads on Monday, and the last time any of them can remember LSU and Alabama playing a game in the rain in Tiger Stadium was 1979. Now, it's a very famous game, or an infamous game in LSU history. The Tigers had championship aspirations that year, and they ended up losing on that day to Alabama 3-0 on a cold, rainy day in Tiger Stadium. But that 1979 game is the last time it rained for a game in Tiger Stadium. And please spare me that it never rains in Tiger Stadium. It rains all the time in Tiger Stadium. It was the last time it rained for an LSU-Alabama game in Tiger Stadium. So maybe we'll get lucky and dodge some raindrops this weekend as well, depending on what that storm may do, but we'll continue to monitor throughout. The other thing Brian Kelly was asked, and we'll leave you with this, because this was the topic of our conversation over the weekend after the Texas A&M upset loss at South Carolina, which was about LSU's playoff hopes. Well, Brian Kelly was asked point blank about the thought and feeling about this being an elimination game for LSU and Alabama, because for all intents and purposes, whoever loses this game, LSU or Alabama, your playoff hopes are done. You're a 3-loss team. As something else I mentioned is this is the first time since 2006 that both LSU and Alabama entered this game with 2 losses. Let me say that again. This is the first time since 2006, the year before Nick Saban showed up in Tuscaloosa, that both LSU and Alabama enter this game with 2 losses. So, yes, whoever gets hung a 3rd loss Saturday in Tiger Stadium, their playoff hopes are done.
Look, all that other stuff is out there, but it doesn't help us relative to probably as balanced of a football team.
Forgive me. I don't know why I keep hitting the wrong button.
Look, all that other stuff is out there, but it doesn't help us relative to what we need to do. And I know there's been other national talks about, this is an elimination game. Well, if this is an elimination game, every game in the SEC is an elimination game. Everybody that has a loss, everybody that has 2 losses, everybody that plays each other, it's an elimination game. So we can kind of put that to rest. This is really about each team in the SEC knows where they're at, right? I mean, the record speaks for itself. This is about you need to play your very best when your best is needed.
Coach speak at its finest. He won't say it, but I will. This is an elimination game. LSU or Alabama, one of them is going to lose on Saturday, and whichever one does has their third loss, and they are done for the college football playoff. I will point out, if you're an LSU fan, remember, Bama has 2 losses on the season, both of them in conference play, both of them on the road in conference play. Alabama has played 2 road conference games, at Vanderbilt, at Tennessee. Those are their 2 losses on the season. They play at LSU, and they have 1 more road conference game as well, due to the Crimson Tide. So this is an Alabama team that has not quite figured out yet how to go on the road and win. They'll play at Oklahoma in the penultimate weekend of the regular season as well. Certainly winnable game there. But Alabama, slight favorite in Tiger Stadium. Hard for me to justify that. I think LSU has proven, especially playing at home, they are a handful, and I think the Tigers will have plenty of reason to celebrate come Saturday night. But got to bottle up Jalen Milroe, got to get a really strong performance from Paul Mubenga, and maybe C.J. Daniels being back will help settle Garrett Nussmeier as well. And let's hope they dodge some raindrops and we have a great night in Tiger Stadium. Okay, that's going to do it for us here on today's episode of Locked On LSU. Hey, now that we're done, go check out Locked On SEC. Our guy Chris Gordy, LSU alum. You can check it out. You can find Locked On SEC on YouTube, wherever you listen to podcasts. If you are listening on a podcast, please subscribe on your favorite podcast app. Rate us, leave a review. If you're on YouTube, smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, and let a friend know that if they love the Tigers, we got you here every single day for Locked On LSU, your team every day.